Immediate context. Have you ever felt like no matter how much you try to balance your life, work, learning, health, family, hobbies, you're always behind? You wake up, go to work, squeeze in a bit of learning or gym time, try to spend time with loved ones, and somehow there's still no time left for yourself. I used to feel exactly like that. Like I was constantly running, doing a lot, but not really moving forward. And at some point, I realized something had to change. That's what this video is about, how to stop relying on motivation and instead build systems that do the heavy lifting for you even when you're tired, busy, or just don't feel like it. Part 2. Establish the common belief. Most people think success, balance, and consistency all come down to one thing: willpower. You know the narrative. If you really want it, you'll make time. Or just push through, try harder. But let's be honest, that mindset works for a few days, maybe a few weeks. Then life hits. You get home from work exhausted. Your plans fall apart. You feel guilty for not doing enough. And the cycle repeats. I've seen this happen not just to myself, but to thousands of professionals I've coached over the past decade. Intelligent, hardworking people who genuinely want to grow, but who still feel trapped in this endless loop of effort without progress. Now, here's the thing most people don't realize. The problem isn't you. It's not that you're lazy or unmotivated. The problem is the system you're operating in. You don't need more discipline. You need a better design for your day, one that runs even when your motivation doesn't. And that's the shift I want to share today, what I call thinking in systems. When you think in systems, you stop fighting yourself. You stop depending on perfect conditions or bursts of energy. Instead, you create repeatable processes that make progress inevitable, even on your worst days. Now, this isn't just theory. I've personally lived through this transformation. Back when I was working full-time as a doctor, running a business, doing my master's degree, and trying to stay healthy and social, I had to learn how to build systems just to survive. It wasn't about working harder, it was about working smarter. And over the years, coaching professionals across different fields, from accountants to entrepreneurs to creatives, I noticed a pattern. The people who succeed sustainably aren't the most disciplined or the most motivated. They're the ones who think in systems. So here's what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to break down what thinking in systems actually means in simple, practical language. Then I'll show you how to apply it to your own life and goals, whether it's learning new skills, exercising consistently, or finally freeing up time to live the life you actually want. By the end of this video, you'll walk away knowing exactly how to build systems that help you make progress without relying on motivation. Systems that free your time, reduce stress, and give you control back over your life. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's start unpacking this. Chapter 2. The Problem. Why Motivation Fails Us. Let's be honest. We've all had those moments when we say, okay, this week is different. I'm going to wake up early, go to the gym, eat clean, and study every night. And for the first few days, it feels incredible. You feel on fire, like you finally figured it out. But then, Wednesday hits. You come home from work exhausted, traffic was worse than usual, maybe a family obligation comes up, or you just want to relax for a bit. And before you know it, the plan starts slipping. Then that guilt kicks in. You tell yourself, I just need more motivation. I need to try harder. And so, the next Monday, you restart the same loop. Sound familiar? Why this happens? Here's the thing. Motivation and willpower are like batteries. They drain. You might start the day fully charged, but every little decision, replying to emails, handling stress, resisting distractions, slowly empties that battery. And by the time you actually reach the things that really matter, learning, exercising, personal growth, you're running on fumes. This isn't just a personal flaw. It's human nature. Psychologists call it decision fatigue.
Neuroscientists can literally see in brain scans how our self-control weakens the more decisions we make in a day. So when you rely only on motivation to get things done, you're setting yourself up to fail. Not because you're not strong enough, but because the system itself is flawed. This is where most people get stuck, especially ambitious professionals. We build plans that depend on us feeling our best. I'll study after work. I'll start eating healthy on Monday. I'll go to the gym when I have more energy. But life doesn't work like that. You can't wait for the stars to align every day. The truth is, you will be tired. You will be distracted. Things will come up. So if your system can only survive on good days, it's not a system. It's a wish. A few years ago, I was coaching an accountant studying for his chartered accountancy exams. He had a full-time job, a family, and a strict study plan. Every day after work, he'd come home, have dinner, and plan to study. Except, he almost never did. By that point, he was mentally drained. His brain just wanted rest. He thought the solution was to just try harder. But it wasn't a motivation problem. It was a system design problem. So we changed the system. Instead of studying at night, he stayed at the office for an extra hour before going home. No commute fatigue, no family distractions, no willpower required. That small change completely transformed his progress, because now the system supported him even when his motivation didn't. This is why I say motivation is overrated. It's not about being more disciplined. It's about designing your environment and habits so that doing the right thing becomes the default, not the exception. And once you start thinking this way, your entire life begins to shift. You start realizing that balance, freedom, and consistent progress are not products of willpower. They're the results of well-built systems. In the next chapter, we'll talk about what thinking in systems actually means and how to start applying it to your own life. We'll go step by step through 3 key principles that can completely change how you approach your goals and finally make consistency effortless.
Chapter 3. Thinking in Systems, the Secret to Sustainable Success. So if motivation and willpower aren't the answer, what is? The answer and the real secret to long-term success is thinking in systems. Now, I know that phrase sounds a bit abstract at first, but here's the simplest way to think about it. A system is just a set of processes that lead to a predictable result. And when you think in systems, you stop asking, how can I motivate myself to do this? And instead start asking, what process can I build so that this happens automatically? That's it. That shift from relying on willpower to designing repeatable processes changes everything. What thinking in systems really means. When I talk about thinking in systems, I don't mean something overly technical or robotic. It's simply about zooming out and seeing the whole picture of how things work together. You stop treating each goal, fitness, sleep, learning, relationships, as separate to-do lists. And instead, you start seeing how they all connect. For example, if you're not getting enough sleep, you'll have less energy. That affects your workouts, which affects your mood, which affects your learning and focus. Everything is connected. So instead of chasing results in isolation, you begin to ask, what are all the factors influencing my success in this area? How do these pieces interact? Where are the friction points, and how can I make them easier? This is holistic thinking, and it's the first principle of thinking in systems. How to apply this principle? When I'm coaching someone to build their own systems, I start by asking 2 simple questions. What have you tried before? And why didn't it work? And most of the time, the answers reveal patterns. Maybe their environment wasn't supportive. Maybe they didn't anticipate fatigue or distractions or life interruptions. So instead of pretending everything will go perfectly, we plan for imperfection. You proactively expect your plan to fail and then design around that failure. It's not pessimism, it's realism. Let me give you an example. A client once told me, I always plan to study after work, but I'm too tired when I get home. So we built that expectation right into the system. We asked, what if you stayed at work an extra hour to study before heading home? Or what if you beat traffic that way, reduced friction, and freed up your evening? That's systems thinking in action, identifying barriers before they happen and creating a smoother path around them. Why this matters. Now, why is this principle so powerful? Because when you think holistically, you stop blaming yourself. You stop saying, I'm not disciplined enough. And instead, you start saying, okay, this process isn't designed well enough yet. That one mindset shift takes you out of self-blame and into problem solving. And that's the real magic of systems thinking. It replaces guilt with curiosity. So that's the first principle. Think holistically. Understand the full ecosystem around your goals. Anticipate what might go wrong and build with that in mind. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the second principle, building for repeatability. This is where your system becomes bulletproof. It keeps working even when you're tired, busy, or having a bad day.
Chapter 4. Building for Repeatability. The Secret to Consistency Without Burnout. All right, so you've learned how to think holistically about your goals. You've started identifying all the factors that affect your success. But now comes the real test. Can you repeat your system on a bad day? Because if your plan only works when you're motivated, rested, and focused, it's not a system. It's a strategy with an expiration date. The real power of systems thinking is in repeatability, designing processes that run even when you don't feel like it. What repeatability means? Repeatability is the ability for your system to deliver results consistently without needing bursts of motivation or perfect conditions. Think of it this way. When you rely on motivation, every day feels like climbing a hill. When you rely on a repeatable system, the hill becomes flat. The goal is to reduce friction, to make doing the right thing easier than not doing it. How to design for repeatability. Let's go back to our example from earlier, the accountant who was studying for his CA exams. His first plan was simple, study after work every evening. But that plan required huge amounts of willpower, because after work, he was tired, hungry, and surrounded by distractions. So we redesigned it for repeatability. We asked, what if you studied before going home while your mind is still sharp? What if you beat traffic and made your environment quieter? What if you treated that extra hour at work as your study zone? No decision-making needed. That one tweak turned a plan that sometimes worked into a system that always worked, because now the environment itself was doing half the work. And why this principle matters. This is the difference between short-term productivity and long-term consistency. When you build for repeatability, you stop depending on motivation and start depending on momentum. Momentum is built through structure by removing unnecessary decisions and friction. In other words, you don't wake up wondering, should I study today? You wake up and the system says, it's time to study now. And here's the thing. For most people, their systems are filled with tiny points of friction they don't even notice. The gym is too far. The study space is messy. The bedtime routine is inconsistent. These little details add up, and each one drains your willpower. When we eliminate them, you free up energy and focus. That's why I often say, the less effort it takes to do the right thing, the more consistent you'll be. Reducing friction in daily life. When I was working full-time as a doctor while studying for my master's and running a business, there was no room for inefficiency. So I built my days like a machine, but a human-friendly one. I set fixed context for each part of my day. Morning, deep learning and writing. No phone, no meetings. Daytime, work and coaching. Evenings, gym and family time. It wasn't about rigidity, it was about predictability. The key was this: each part of my day flowed naturally into the next. I didn't have to decide what to do, the system decided for me. And that's the essence of repeatability. Designing your life so that the path of least resistance leads you to success. When you think in systems and design for repeatability, consistency becomes inevitable. You stop having on and off days because the system keeps going. You don't rely on discipline, you rely on design. That's how high performers, athletes, entrepreneurs, creators keep showing up every day. They've just removed the decision fatigue. So that's the second principle: build for repeatability. Now, at this point, you'll start to notice something powerful. When you combine holistic thinking with repeatable systems, you begin to make progress without forcing it. But to make that progress sustainable long-term and avoid overcomplicating your system, you'll need one last principle. And that's what we'll explore next: peeling the Band-Aid, how to simplify, evolve, and strengthen your systems over time.
Chapter 5. Peeling the Band-Aid. How to make your systems evolve with you. By this point, you started to see what happens when you think holistically and build for repeatability. You begin making progress. Things start to flow. But here's something most people don't talk about. Even the best designed systems can become overly complicated if you're not careful. That's why the final principle is what I call peeling the Band-Aid. Because when you first build your system, you're going to use temporary fixes, shortcuts, reminders, little hacks, and that's perfectly okay. But if you never remove those short-term patches, your system will eventually start holding you back instead of helping you move forward. What peeling the Band-Aid means. Let me explain. When you're just starting out, you'll often rely on quick solutions to get you moving. You might take short naps to fight fatigue. You might use timers or focus apps to stay on track. You might reward yourself for sticking to your schedule. These are all Band-Aids. They're great for the short term, but they don't solve the root problem. The nap isn't the real fix. Getting quality sleep is. The timer isn't the real fix. Improving your focus habits is. The reward isn't the real fix. Learning to enjoy the process itself is. So, as your system starts to work, the next level is about removing the Band-Aids, one by one, and replacing them with deeper, long-term habits. How to do it step by step. Here's how I approach this when I'm coaching someone. First, we identify what's propping up their current system. Then, we slowly work to eliminate those supports by fixing the underlying causes. Let's say your productivity system only works if you take a midday nap. Ask yourself, why am I so tired in the first place? What's my sleep quality like? Am I overworking or not taking real breaks? Once you start addressing the root issue, maybe improving your bedtime routine or reducing caffeine, the nap becomes optional, not necessary. That's how your system evolves. It gets simpler, stronger, and more resilient over time. My own Band-Aids. When I was balancing my work as a doctor, running a business, and doing my master's, I had a lot of Band-Aids. I used noise-canceling headphones to drown out distractions. I relied on caffeine to push through fatigue. I used productivity timers to force focus. And at the time, they worked. But they were temporary. As I began improving my sleep, reducing unnecessary workload, and structuring my mornings around deep work, I didn't need those Band-Aids anymore. My focus came naturally. My energy lasted longer, and most importantly, my system felt lighter. That's the beauty of peeling the Band-Aid. It's not about removing what works, it's about removing what's no longer needed. Most people think success is about adding more tools, more apps, more habits. But in reality, the path to mastery is about removing what no longer serves you. When you simplify your systems, you create clarity. And clarity creates freedom. You start realizing that progress doesn't come from doing more, it comes from doing less but better. This is what separates people who grow steadily for years from those who burn out after a few months.
They know how to evolve their systems, to adapt, simplify, and keep them human. So that's the third and final principle. Peel the Band-Aid. Start with the easy fixes, but don't stop there. Keep refining your system until it runs smoothly, not just today, but for years to come. In the next and final chapter, we'll tie everything together. How these three principles connect, how to design your own life system, and how to finally break free from the cycle of busyness without progress. Final chapter: how to design a system that gives you freedom. So let's take a moment to zoom out. We've covered a lot, from why motivation fails us to how to build systems that keep working no matter what life throws at you. And by now, you've probably started to realize something powerful. Success, real, sustainable success, doesn't come from doing more. It comes from designing better. Because once you think in systems, everything changes. The three principles. Let's quickly recap what we've learned. 1. Think holistically. See your goals as part of a larger ecosystem. Anticipate the obstacles before they happen. Understand that your sleep, your energy, your focus, and your environment are all connected. 2. Build for repeatability. Don't design for perfect days. Design for real days. Remove friction, make the right actions automatic. Let structure, not willpower, carry you forward. 3. Peel the Band-Aid. Start with small fixes, but always work toward deeper, simpler, more sustainable systems. As you evolve, your system should evolve with you. When you combine these three principles, you create something that most people never experience. A life that runs smoothly, not because it's easy, but because it's designed intelligently. Why this matters so much? Because we live in a world that constantly rewards busyness. We've been conditioned to equate effort with progress. But if your effort isn't directed through a smart system, it just becomes noise. You end every week exhausted and still feeling behind. When you build systems, you're no longer fighting yourself. You're no longer at the mercy of motivation or mood swings. You're operating from design, not default. And that's what gives you freedom. Freedom to grow without burning out. Freedom to work, learn, rest, and live without feeling like you're always sacrificing something. How to start building your own system. So here's what I'd love you to do after this video. Pick just one area of your life. It could be learning, health, finances, or focus. Then walk it through the three principles. 1. Look at it holistically. What affects it? What barriers exist? 2. Make it repeatable. How can you make it easy to follow on your worst days? 3. Peel the Band-Aid. What small fixes can you replace with long-term habits over time? And as you start applying this, you'll notice a shift, not immediately dramatic, but deeply sustainable. You'll stop feeling like you're constantly chasing time, and instead start creating it. If there's one thing I've learned from coaching thousands of professionals over the past decade, it's that freedom isn't found in doing less. It's found in doing what truly matters effortlessly. And systems thinking is how you get there. Because once your systems start taking care of the small stuff, your mind finally has the space to focus on the big stuff, the learning, the growth, the people you love. And that's the kind of success worth building. If this video helped you rethink the way you approach your goals, I'd love for you to join the community. Hit the subscribe button, and let's keep building a life that works by design, not by default. You don't need more motivation. You need better systems. And once you build them, everything else follows.